Hello my fellow internet nerds and welcome to another video. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today I want to discuss the concept of fake difficulty. Now if you've never heard of this term, I guarantee you have experienced it in one form or another. It's fairly prevalent. Now the format of today's video, I want to explain what fake difficulty is, give a few examples of it, and then also show you how you can differentiate between real difficulty, actually hard games, and fake difficulty where the computer is effectively cheating. And then I also want to quickly discuss why I believe this is an issue and what I think some of the problematic areas of this trope. But before we jump straight into it, I would just ask if you could please give me a like and a subscribe if you're enjoying my content. It really does mean the world to me, and it also means the world to the algorithm gods, and it can help me achieve some traction on my channel, and that would be fantastic. So yeah, if you want to just drop a like and a subscribe, if you could, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. But after that then, let's just jump straight in, shall we? So, fake difficulty. Well listen, when you play a video game, you expect to be able to use your skills as a gamer to beat whatever challenges the game may throw at you. Now if the challenge requires a lot of skill, well, the game is hard to win. Now fake difficulty is when the game should, in theory, be easy, or it is hard, but it's harder than it needs to be. So let me give you a really good example I think most people have probably come across, and it's called Rubber Band AI. Now, this is used in racing games, among others, but mostly racing games. And the concept behind it is that if you're losing or doing poorly in whatever your challenge may be, in whatever racing game you may be on, then the cars in front of you will be going a little bit slower and maybe taking corners not as well as they should do to allow you to catch up. And if you're in the lead, well, the cars will be driving very well. They'll take each corner perfectly, hitting the apex, and they'll do it at speed, and yeah, they'll just be driving very well. Now, the idea behind this is to give you a dynamic difficulty, so that you can catch up if you have a bit of an accident or whatnot, or if you're winning, there is some challenge to the game. But some games, Need for Speed, I'm looking at you, take it a little bit too far, where the AI cars literally cheat. They drive way faster than they should be able to. Say like they're driving a Porsche and it can only go 200 miles an hour. Well, they will go 200 miles an hour, but they'll do that at every single corner. They won't even slow down. They can just drive through obstacles, and sometimes they'll even go faster than they should be able to go, than you would be able to go. And that's when it is fake difficulty, because the race isn't difficult because the AI is very good. You're very good. That's why you're in the lead. The AI is cheating, and that's what makes it difficult. And that's, let's be honest, not fair. So, in and of itself, Rubber Band AI is not particularly problematic. It's the way it can be implemented that's problematic. Now, Rubber Band AI is just one example. Personally, I think fake difficulty can be broken down into three distinct flavours. Number one is bad technical aspects of the game. Number two is the outcome is not reasonably determined by your actions. And number three is denial of information. Now I know those may seem a bit abstract, but I am going to go through each one individually and explain some of the examples that are there and why this is an issue and what makes this fake difficulty compared to just a genuinely difficult game. Okay, so let's talk about that first flavour then, and that is bad technical aspects of a game. So a technical aspect of a game is something to do with the programming. Generally, this is something to do with the programming. So the best example is the one I just used, Rubber Band AI, which in and of itself is not an issue, but it can be implemented in a way that makes the game unfair. And ultimately, that's what fake difficulty is. It's fairness. So a good example of a fair game would be something like Dark Souls or Super Meat Boy. The reason they are difficult is because they are genuinely hard. Super Meat Boy, for example, it's making a difficult jump is genuine difficulty. Making that same jump when the camera angle suddenly rotates, therefore shifting the orientation of your controls mid-air, well, that's fake difficulty. No one could reasonably expect that to occur in a simple platforming game. So that's where the fake difficulty comes in. Now, another version of fake difficulty can be something like Call of Duty on the higher difficulty settings, the veteran difficulty settings. So, some people may disagree with me here, but my argument on this, hear me out, is that the reason it's fake in its difficulty is because the AI doesn't actually do anything different. It doesn't actually use any more advanced tactics. There's just either more enemies, so again, artificially inflating the numbers, like it does with the speed of racing cars, or it artificially increases their health, so they're harder to kill. It lowers your health, or artificially increases their damage. Either way, the upshot is that you die more easily. So it's only difficult because effectively numbers have been changed on a programming table somewhere, not because the AI is actively doing anything different. There's no advanced tactics being used or anything like that. They're just more accurate, more powerful, and have more health. So it's kind of not real difficulty in my mind. I'm sorry, that's just what I believe. Now, another good example would be bullet sponge bosses, like in the Division, say. In the Division, a lot of the bosses just kind of stand there and shoot at you, and the only reason they're difficult is because they take a while to kill. Because, again, they have an artificially inflated health pool. That their HP is just enormous, to the point where it becomes somewhat irrelevant what they're actively doing in the game. And again, that's fake difficulty. Now, having said that, that aspect of fake difficulty with the bullet sponge boss can actually veer over into the second flavour of fake difficulty, which is the outcome is not reasonably determined by player actions, i.e. your actions. Now, I understand that one might sound a little bit abstract, but effectively all it means is that whatever action you take as the player doesn't realistically or reasonably affect any outcome. So an example would be, famously, escort missions. You can do whatever you want, but if your AI companion is programmed very poorly, they might set off alarms, attract the attention of guards or monsters, whatever. So the point there is that it doesn't matter what you do, the player, your actions, the outcome isn't determined by that. That is fake difficulty. Now, on screen, I'm showing you The Last of Us, which is Escort Mission, the game. Famously, what they did was just have everyone ignore Ellie, which can be weirdly immersive breaking, because suddenly Ellie will walk straight in front of a guard or a zombie, and they will do nothing. It is quite amusing. But, I mean, actually, are they zombies in... Would we call them zombies in Last of Us? I'm going with zombies. I like zombies. But yeah, so that's all that really means. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but that's all I mean by that. And you're basically being screwed by shoddy AI. Famously, another example of this would be any form of squad-based military shooter, where your AI squad team are just awful and don't really do anything and actively hinder you. Another issue would be, as I mentioned, damage sponge bosses. Now, they do kind of veer into this territory. There is some overlap here. But yeah, that's all that number 2 means. Let's move on to flavour 3, though. Denial of information. Okay, all this one means is that the game is supposedly difficult, but actually the only reason it's difficult is because you need a guide. Now, I call these guide dangits. And the issue here is that what the game is expecting you to do could not reasonably be solved by the clues in-game. So a great example of this would be L.A. Noire, which I actually mentioned in my last video, which the game got stuck in development hell. And the reason for that was because they were using a new technology to scan actors' faces. The idea being that in interrogations, you would be able to tell whether they were lying or not. The problem with L.A. Noire is the interrogations. The game is expecting you to understand that you need to ignore things like logical fallacies. And all of this is incredibly non-intuitive, particularly during the early cases where you're not used to the game. A very specific example of this would be that the game frequently gives you several possible leads to follow up on. However, sometimes one lead will provide evidence that can trap a suspect in a lie later on. But if you follow the leads out of order, you might be unable to challenge the suspect. The game never warns you. It falls entirely to the player to figure out in advance, which is sometimes impossible without psychic foresight or a strategy guide. Luckily, neither the game nor any individual cases become unwinnable, but you can botch an interview and it does affect how it happens, so that can be unfortunate. Let's move on as well, though, to Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which I mean, if anyone's ever played it, they must be aware of this. It is nearly impossible without a guide to collect all of the masks, to the point that in the 3DS version of the remake, it includes an extensive hint system to counteract this. Certain masks are obtained by going to completely random spots at an arbitrarily fixed time, or by using an item or mask in a completely irrelevant location. It can be infuriating. I actually did have to use a guide. I tried, and I had to use a guide on that game back when I was about 12. But yeah, so that's what the denial of information is. It's just that everything about is so random, or so obscure, or so arbitrary, that it is impossible for any reasonable player to have figured it out. Okay, so those are the 3 different flavours and some examples of fake difficulty. I hope you're getting the idea now of what I mean by fake difficulty. But let's talk then about how do you spot fake difficulty, because it can be harder than you think. So a lot of this is subjective, and a lot of these are also contextual. For example, simply having a lot of health does not make a boss fake difficult. Being able to kill a player in 1 or 2 hits is not fake difficulty. Dark Souls is a great example of this, where you effectively have to get good, scrub, but you can. If you learn to dodge and parry and use your abilities properly, then actually it's difficult, but fair. So, let's talk about that. Fairness. I want to talk about Final Fantasy. Now, Final Fantasy have a lot of super bosses, and a lot of them are genuinely difficult. However, in Final Fantasy XII, we have, I believe it's pronounced Yizamat. Please mock me in the comments for that, but there we go. He has like 50 million health, and can kill you very easily. Now, it was genuinely at the time considered if you beat this guy in like 6 hours, you'd done well. I claim that he was difficult only because he had so much health, and then halfway through the battle he would actually gain a 50% damage reduction, which meant that you now hit for even less, half of what you could hit previously. So initially just a difficult boss with an unreasonable amount of health, but it's that bit in the middle where suddenly you do even less. That's the bit. It extends the battle, it artificially extends the battle. It's simply the computer inflating the defense stats of the boss. The boss doesn't change his tactics, he doesn't change what he's doing. And this can lead to something that's related to fake difficulty, but maybe its own thing, I'm not too sure, but fake longevity. Okay, so now let's move to trying to spot fake difficulty somewhere else. Let's talk about Destiny 2, or as I would call it, fake longevity, the game. So at launch, there really actually wasn't that much content in Destiny 2, and I have sunk hundreds of hours into this game, by the way. It was very, very difficult, though, at launch to reach top level. But the only reason it was difficult was due to RNG. It was difficult to get the right bits of armour to drop, and it was also difficult in terms of the amount of time you'd have to sink into it. But there wasn't really content. It was a long game, you could put a lot of hours, but it was fake longevity. You were just repeating the same gameplay loop over and over and over again, constantly repeating strikes, and defeating the bosses. But even the bosses, a lot of them were kind of easy. A lot of them were bullet sponges as well, which, as we've talked about, is a form of fake difficulty. So it had both of these aspects in it. Now, you could also only get, I think it was 4 or 5 pieces of the really high level armour per week. Why? That is just arbitrary. That is Bungie artificially limiting how much you can get. So they, again, are artificially extending how much time you have to put into the game. The game wasn't hard to reach max level. You just have to put a lot of time into it. And again, that doesn't mean the game's difficult then, does it? With those 2 examples as well, I'm hoping you can see now how you can spot fake difficulty. How simply having a lot of health or being difficult isn't in itself fake difficulty. And it is important to remember as well that simply having difficult gameplay features or frustrating gameplay mechanics again doesn't make it difficult. So you also, fake difficulty isn't inherently bad. If used subtly, it can provide a satisfying challenge in cases where the AI might be lacking, particularly in those earlier games back in the early 2000s and 90s. However, it is obviously preferable for the AI to provide a challenge by playing well than by getting special advantages from the programmer and cheating. Now, I do think that in modern games this is actually slightly more problematic because it is meaning that the developers don't just have to put content into these games. Okay, so the reason I bring up Destiny 2 is because at launch, it is much better now, I need to point that out, it is a lot better now, but at launch, there really wasn't much to it. A lot of it, the Division also had this exact same problem, because it was effectively just Destiny in New York with guns rather than space magic. And the issue was, there wasn't really much game. And I've seen this trend over and over, and it's purposefully trying to artificially extend the length of a game without actually having to be creative and put good content in. Now you just give a boss with a load of health who, you know, midway through has a shield that can protect him and halves the damage. So again, it's always artificial, and that's what frustrates me about this and annoys me about this. And I think sometimes it can be good, like with a dynamic racing setup, you know, for rubber band AI, but all this fakery, it's just frustrating in my mind. Why can't we have games and developers who are actually putting creative thought into how the AI can operate strategically or tactically, rather than just giving them a high health pool and powerful guns? I just don't think it's fair on consumers, and it's a trend that I am concerned about. But there we go. That's it from me though today, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And, you know, maybe learned about fake difficulty a little bit if you hadn't heard about it before. If you hadn't maybe heard about the concept, you've definitely noticed it. I guarantee you, anyone who's played a racing game has. But yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope maybe you've learned what fake difficulty is, and maybe how to spot it as well. And maybe next time when you're out there playing a game and you actually do spot this fake difficulty, tweet me about it. I'd love to talk to people about this concept. So yeah, my Twitter handle's on screen now. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you want to drop me a like or a subscribe if you've really enjoyed this content, that would be fantastic. I would really appreciate that. But for now, thank you so much for watching. And if you do want to watch more, there will be a YouTube suggested video on screen now. But that's it from me, guys. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate the support you all give me. And I will see you next time, or on Twitter. Bye for now.